Hey, all, welcome back to Tech Backstage. Happy Tuesday. Today I am joined by Gary Hagmueller, President and Chief Executive Officer over at Arcion Labs. Gary, how you doing?
I'm super well, Eddie. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm doing great, man. I'm just powering through the week. Headed up to Texas on Friday, so trying to jam in as
Ah,
much
nice.
work before Thursday as I can. And yeah, man, excited about that. And
Awesome. Yeah,
so
good
yeah,
for you.
yeah, thanks, dude. Yeah, pretty good week so far, I'd have to say.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, really quick before we dive into talking about data and how you can use it in your organization, would love to hear just a little bit about you. Introduce yourself
hmm
to the audience, and talk a little bit about your backstory and how you ended up getting to
Yeah.
Archeon.
Yeah, no, that's I'm happy to do it. My backstory is I've been in the technology industry for 20, 25 years now. Basically, almost all of that has been selling things to enterprises. Almost all of it has been in like recurring revenue sorts of models, right? Even back before we had SaaS, right? I used to joke around and tell people like, I was doing SaaS before people could spell it. And so the last 10 years or so, what I've been doing, or what I'd been doing, was basically selling large scale machine learning and AI applications to banks, health systems, insurance companies, government agencies, other things like that, right? And the interesting thing about that experience was the fact that we were able to sell really large, really expensive applications, like $1 million plus sorts of applications on an annualized sort of basis to people who wanted to have powerful machine learning kind of drive their decisions or detect, bad actors, or, do some next best action sort of thing. Everybody wanted the data that powered those applications to come in as close to real time as possible. I mean, think about it this way, right? If you have a fraud detection sort of application, you don't want to wait, days or weeks for the data to refresh because patterns change, right? So everybody wanted it on a real time basis. Dirty little secret is almost nobody got it on a real time basis, right? Because the ways in which you were able to pull the data out of the production systems that gave you the data to power those models would basically be done in some batch mode. They'd show up every 2 weeks, maybe a month, right? Occasionally, somebody would change something, right, and then the model would break, right, and you'd run around and have to fix it and all that sort of stuff, right? And so, that was the world that I'd come out of, right? And as I was thinking about what to do next, I was looking around the technology sort of space and stumbled across this change data capture opportunity set here, right? And these sets of companies that were doing things that kind of address that, right? And as I jokingly say, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, as we go forward, as I jokingly say, once I really came to understand what change data capture does and how it works, I kind of got a little mad that I didn't know about it, years ago, because it would have solved so many of my and my customers' problems, right? And so that's basically what brought me here to Archeon. Archeon's a couple years old. I'd gotten to know the founder pretty well, gotten to marvel at what he had built, right? And he's built a really amazing product behind the scenes. And so then, as I kind of alluded to a few moments ago, the light bulb, shall we say, just went off, and this seemed like the perfect sort of thing to start ramping up the market awareness of.
Cool. Probably something important to highlight here. Can you just give a high level overview of what change data capture is for those who are not aware?
Yeah, yeah. So great question. Um, the way to think about change data capture is if you are running a production database, right? So let's say an Oracle, or MySQL, or any sort of production database, even mainframe stuff like DB2 and other things like that. Basically, what's happening is those are really good at reads and writes, when a transaction comes through or other things like that. And those are also optimized to make sure that they're super fast to take those reads and writes without having anything slow them down, or without having them do any other sorts of things, right? And there's a whole variety of reasons for that, right? You want them to be secure. You need them to record all the transactions. You can't have any stuff mucking around in there that shouldn't be in there, and so on and so forth. So when you live in a world such as that, you really have a limited way of getting things out of those systems anywhere close to the speed with which the transactions occur, right? And so what change data capture does is it basically reads the logs that sit next to the database. So just by background for people who don't understand it, when anytime something is written into a database, the same basic thing is also transcribed into a log. Now, those logs evolved for a variety of reasons, for troubleshooting, for security purposes, whatever. But they're a complete record of what went into the database. And what change data capture does is it essentially listens to the logs for the changes as they occur, right? And then what it does is it takes it and moves it or replicates it to some other system, call it, a cloud data warehouse, another analytical sort of database, or something else to that effect, right? The hallmarks of CDC are it does it in real time, right? So this is a solution that if you want to take advantage of the fact that you've got transactions coming through your system and you want to take actions on them, you would use something like CDC. It also does it with what's called transactional integrity, right? And so what that means is you have to spend a lot of effort in the middle, making sure that you send it once and only once, right? Because if you have some sort of analytics and like 5 of the same things show up, obviously you're going to, have a problem with your analytics, right?
Right.
So that's essentially what CDC does. Right. It's not really there for things like, monitoring SaaS systems or other things, although you could use things like CDC to get at those, right? It's really more about taking information out of production databases and making sure that they essentially become mobile so that you can do whatever you want on whatever platform you need to do stuff on, be it, something for machine learning or to build an application or, what have you.
Right. I love that. All right. Cool. So, quick oversight on CDC. So, to me, it sounds like a really complex log tail, and that gets built out
Mhm.
into, like you said, gets ported over to other systems. But
Yeah.
you can also take those and actually end up recreating it all in your other platform, right? And so
Yeah.
that's where that huge connect between not actually directly trying to read the production database comes in, is you're actually kind of doing
Yeah.
it off to the side, right?
Exactly. Yeah, so exactly right. So you kind of mentioned something that's kind of interesting. So most of the business that we do is that replication-based business where you're taking things out of one database and you're moving it into, let's say, a Snowflake or a Databricks or something like that. But it also allows you to do things like migrations. Like, so, okay, I have this old database and I want to move things to this new database. I want to build up the new database, right, and all the applications and things that hang off of that before I shut down the old system. So it can do that as well. And the whole point of all of this is you do it in a way that does not tax the source system itself. So you never want those things running any slower than they can, or you want to minimize the amount of slowness
Right.
that goes into there. And you also do it in a highly secured way, right? Because think about it this way: if you don't actually touch the production database, you can't corrupt it, you can't bring it down, you can't do a lot of the other things that might create security headaches for the people that run them, right? So that's another one of the hallmarks there.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I think that's a really good point. And we were just talking about this backstage, but for example, the healthcare industry, you may not even have the ability to touch the production
Right.
database due to HIPAA
Right.
compliance and things like that. So this is a great way
Yeah.
to actually be able to get that information over into a separate system for you to be able to build out your analytics and stuff without actually getting into the database itself.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, Eddie. As we were chatting earlier, all of my older customers, right? They'd go through. So we would sell to people who were, either the data science teams or actually the business owners themselves that have a specific problem to solve. And there was always this tortured exercise where they'd have to go to the DBAs and the IT group to say, "Can I please have a data pipe out of these systems?" And it would be this process whereby lots and lots of security checks and other sorts of problems would evolve in there, and almost invariably it would take weeks at best, if not months, to get this stuff together. The interesting thing we find at Arcion when we interact with the IT folks, they spend a couple days looking at what we do, and very quickly they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we can totally do this, right?" Because it basically solves a lot of the problems that they have to deal with on their end. So, from the perspective of making it easier and faster for folks to get at the data, and also lightening the burden of the people who have to manage the source systems themselves, this becomes kind of a win-win sort of scenario for anybody looking to build what I would describe as kind of a modern data architecture.
Cool. Quick question, kind of a sidebar here before we go back to talking about unlocking the data. Actually, this is probably a really good segue into unlocking the data, because one of the things that I'm
Okay.
really curious about is how hard is this to implement? Like,
Well, okay. So that was one of the things that made me most interested about this company versus some of the others out there. We're not the only people doing CDC. Most of the other folks have been around for 15, 20 years. Um, and so there's some basic architecture choices that were required 20 years ago versus today. So what I'd characterize as the older school applications or older school technologies that do this, they tend to be harder to set up, in all candor, right? And they're not going to scale necessarily in the same sort of way that you might see modern applications that are horizontally distributable and all that sort of stuff scale up. The benefit of what we've done here is we've come along at a later stage, right? We've reimagined what you can do with the architectural bits that are in place today. And what that's allowed us to do is to basically build something to answer your question that is quite quick to set up. Now you could, if you wanted to, you could go to our website, and we have a cloud instance. It literally is, you go and you put in your credentials for whatever the source system is or whatever the target system is, or assign it to somebody else so that they can come up with the right credentials, because that's part of it too. And then some basic mapping. Hey, this field in the source that says zip, I want it to be zip code in my analytical system, and some basic things like that. And then you hit the sync button, right? And so what happens behind the scenes is that it starts to move data over and starts doing a snapshot. So we're going to take an example of the data at the moment we hit the go button, and then we're going to do CDC immediately afterwards, right? So that basically you're not dropping anything or leaving anything. And so in doing so, you're basically up and running. You can be up and running in the order of minutes, right? Now in more
wow.
complex environments, yeah, it may take a little bit longer to get access rights or other things like that. So that's one of it. The second piece of it is we have spent a huge amount of time on basically making it brain dead simple to do this, right? And so what that means is that we have user interface elements right now that are really designed to be intuitive. Behind the scenes, the architecture itself is what I would describe as kind of self-healing, right? So the pieces that listen, right, speak to the pieces that write into the downstream data warehouse or what have you. And so if one of them goes online, the other one is basically like either chatting or listening until the other thing comes back up. And then when it comes back up, it says, okay, well, send me everything since this one particular transaction here. And we could go on for probably another half an hour to 45 minutes about the cool and interesting things we do in the middle to make life ridiculously easy. But
Yeah.
the point of what we do is like, look, the whole vision behind the company is data should be free for you to build whatever application, machine learning, BI, what have you, on whatever platform suits the building of it best. And you shouldn't have to worry about how to get it there, right? There should be a solution like this that allows you to get it there at whatever speed and capability you need it to get there at.
Right. Yeah, and I love that because one of the things that I've discovered building applications is there's a couple things that are not quite as simple as some people think they are.
Yeah.
Uh, Two of my favorites are analytics and push notifications,
Hmm.
because a lot of people just generally assume that those are things that work out of the box, but the way
Yep.
that it actually works is you have to define it. You have to define,
Exactly.
hey, what are you analyzing and why are
Exactly.
you analyzing it, right? And even talking about
Yeah.
machine learning models, for example, cool. You got all this information and you're going to feed it into, a machine learning system. Do you understand what the independent variables are versus the dependent,
Yeah.
output that you're looking for?
Yeah.
And do you understand which ones are actually valuable to your model? And that
Yep.
takes time to refine, right?
Yeah.
So, I guess kind of the next point. So CDC, you guys are agnostic to the data. You're basically just sending everything. And then,
Well, no.
oh, okay, here we go.
So there's some, yeah, I know there's some. So look, I love the way that you framed that out, because like what you just described, like, so problem number one was getting access to the data. Problem number two was contextualizing it, right? I can't tell you how many times I interacted with companies who, like, some business person went to the data scientist and said, "Hey, help me build a model that shows X," and the data scientist be like, "Yeah," and he'd go to the data engineer and say, "Go to the system and give me, like, this thing and that thing and these things over here," and they'd pull these things in. They'd refine this model, and with pride they'd show it to the business owner, and the business owner would go like, "What the hell is that?" Right? You miss
Yeah.
like half the things that, like, that we think about in this business. And so then you'd have this iterative process where they'd go back and pull more data and then start to realize, oh, these things really matter and all that. The way to get around that is to kind of understand the business rules that actually live within the production data system itself. And keep in mind, those things have been refined over a lot of time, right? And they reflect basically the realities of what the business deals with and how the customers interact with them. So if you understand, which is one of the beautiful things about being able to read the production logs, what you can see is like, oh, okay, well, every time a transaction comes in, these 5 tables all got updated in this sort of way. So basically, if we want to build an analysis that looks at this type of transaction, we better get all of those things, right? Because otherwise, something's going to wind up getting missed. And that's the beauty of what we can do, is we can help folks understand the pieces that come, and they may not have to go and pull down some of the information that perhaps is extraneous, right? And there's a big reason why you may not want to pull down extraneous information, because in the new world where you're moving everything into a cloud database, and those cloud databases wind up charging you for compute and other sorts of things, if you pull in everything, and including the kitchen sink, you're going to get a big fat bill that you don't necessarily need to get. So that's another hallmark of what we're able to do, is help people understand the context of what it is they're building, help them get what they need to get, but not more than they need to get, so that they can optimize for both the model's effectiveness, as well as the cost requirements, their budgets are probably going to lock them into.
Right. No, I love that, because I mean, I would have just assumed that, like you said, it's just sending everything over to, another platform where you're going to do the analysis there. But the fact that you're able to actually identify that stuff on the CDC side and help, build that stuff out for efficiency before even sending it over, I think that's
Yeah,
huge, right? I mean, that's really important. And like you said, everything that almost anybody's doing nowadays is at least new stuff. Maybe not the older,
yeah,
like you said, the older mainframe stuff. Maybe they're still waiting to move over, but most applications that I see nowadays are cloud native, and so you do
yep,
get pinged for the the database size, the reads, and all that stuff.
yeah,
So I think that's really interesting.
yeah,
Um, let's talk a little bit. So I also want to like kind of highlight really quick why this stuff is important, right? Because I'm a very data driven person. Like I'm
right,
very engineer brain, kind of drives my wife crazy every once in a while, because like
yeah,
if I could have like data points in front of me for what I would eat for dinner, I would probably use those to actually, you know what I mean, like that. I
right,
get online, that's the
yep,
first thing I look at every morning is our
yeah,
BI, and I'm like, all right, well, this is what happened yesterday, and like there's no emotion, it's just numbers
yeah,
on a screen. But
exactly,
so CDC and using data to drive an organization, I think sometimes it's not 100% apparent why you're going to do it in certain situations, but at the end of the day, let's talk a little bit about, I don't know if you have any interesting use cases, but I'd love to understand a little bit your opinion on why it's important to unlock that data and how you can
yeah.
end up using that data to drive your business and make business decisions.
Yeah. So So first off, I appreciate your wife's concerns. I think I have a similar situation going on
Yeah.
in my house. Um, so look, the essence of what you're asking, is what's the value, that you can unlock from your data, right? And there's been lots of studies over time that talk about how the time value of data actually really kind of matters, right? Now, it matters more in certain circumstances than others, right? But think about it from a fraud sort of environment, right? If you have input on how, your transactions are flowing, right, and you're able to detect patterns that say, oh, this is problematic, right? We should explore this, or we should block this, or we should take other actions, to keep us from being, exploited. That's a very valuable sort of thing, right? And you really only get that if you can tap into things as close to real time as possible. There's a second set of things that are kind of important, right? And this is customer interactions. You're never going to be as close to your customer as when they're actually interacting with you. So whether they're on your website or calling your call center or other things like that, right? The information that customer may be doing at the moment can guide where your ability to talk to that customer and influence either what they buy or help them, with a process that makes them feel like, oh boy, this company certainly understands my needs and took care of me. That's an important piece of it, that you can do in these sorts of applications, right? And candidly, the list goes on, right? I mean, like every day we're coming up with new sorts of applications. Like IoT shows up a lot, right? Apple, like for example, let's take Uber, right? So like you looking at your cell phone, right, and trying to figure out, is this driver coming down Sixth Avenue, and like where how far away is the guy, right? That happens because CDC behind the scenes pulls out a lot of information about the driver, pulls out information about you, and a lot of other things, and gives it to you in one very rich sort of experience, which really transforms the way Uber's customers, even think about how to get from point A to point B. So those are examples of the things that can really create opportunities if you're able to tap into the real time dynamics of the data itself. Because frankly, as I mentioned earlier, it's never going to be more valuable than the moment at which the interaction is happening. Right, that's when you can the greatest degrees of freedom that you have, as well as the highest ability to influence what an outcome would be, and that's at the moment of the transaction.
Right. And this is like this is the words failing to hit my brain right now, but this is like these are systems that are continually, like you said, in real time, looking at the
Yeah,
data, could potentially be making recommendations, or potentially, so it's they're basically giving themselves feedback, because you're giving them the ability to
yeah,
actually get in and analyze data in real time, potentially make decisions based on that, and then continue to
yeah.
iterate on the process, right?
Yeah, it really depends on on how you're using it, right? So, like, I can draw on an example in the past, like anti-money laundering sort of stuff, right? So, some of those customers I used to sell to, what they wanted to do is they wanted to deploy these solutions to determine whether or not there were bad actors who were trying to like do certain things, to get around the anti-money laundering sorts of controls, right? And so that's a circumstance that if you don't identify the patterns relatively quickly, right, you're going to miss some stuff. Now, keep in mind, if
Right.
you're refreshing data like every month, right, it's not like the bad guys are like, oh, well, you caught me, so I'm just going to wait another month before I try something new, right? The moment at which they realize, oh, somebody's on to me, like they're going to try something else, right? And
Right.
so if you're not able to pick up the patterns on that stuff quickly, right, you're going to leave a lot of the value you could determine out of that model by the wayside, right?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
there's like you said, like we were talking earlier, there's like the apps themselves, which basically like you feed the real time information in, and it can be providing instructive sorts of things, like DoorDash or Uber or other things like that. Those are nice visceral examples that everybody can think about. But it's not necessarily limited to those, right? It could be limited.
Yep.
It could be any sort of thing where you as a company are interacting with a customer, and they could benefit from seeing something in motion or in transit or otherwise, showing them the status of stuff.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the fraud stuff, it made me think of a really fun example when I was, years ago when I was in New York City. I was just walking down the street and I got a call from my bank, and they were like, "Hey, are you trying to buy
Mm,
$1,000 worth of sneakers at Nike right now?" And,
right.
at that point in my life, I don't even think I had $1,000 in my bank account, but somehow somebody had cloned my card that was in my pocket,
Mm,
walking down the street. But you're right, like, not having that feedback ahead of time, like if they're not able to do that in real time, they look at that a week later and go, oh, maybe Eddie was at Nike, but we're not sure, that doesn't fit his pattern. Like at that point,
yeah.
the card's already been used everywhere else too, right? So
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
those examples, though, by the way, so what triggered there was a model, some basic model that has triggers behind the scenes, right? That says like, oh, okay, well, Eddie never spends $1,000 on shoes, right? And here it is, and so
Or
that's
anywhere.
yeah, right. So that's materially different than what he did, right? And so, so those models in the olden school, like if this was a number of years ago, those models would be updated like every month or two,
Hmm.
right? And I guess that's the point that I'm trying to get at is you probably want to update those models as frequently as your models can tolerate being updated. right? Because like the more nuance you can sniff out, right? Because your behavior patterns will change and the fraudsters' behavior patterns will change. And so the faster you can make those models work, the more fraud you're going to stamp out of the system, and the
Yeah.
better the experience for the customers as well.
Yeah. I also love there's another example, this is the one I was telling you about backstage, but there CDC has so many more implications beyond just real-time
Right.
data analysis because like I'm thinking about, particular uses where you're looking at it
Hmm.
more as like an up to the minute sort of analytics. So you could
Yep.
still be looking back over the past 30 days, but maybe you want to implement a change in your processes, and what you could actually
Yep.
do is you can take that previous 30 days data, but with your real time up to the minute analytics, you
Yep.
can actually say, okay, we implemented this process starting on Monday. Have we seen any sort of
Exactly.
measurable improvement in the process since Monday?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's exactly it. That's it. That's precisely it. When you start to bend the curve, you can start to see very quickly how fast did I bend the curve, right? Or how
Yep.
quickly did I change the thing. So yeah, you're spot on that.
Yeah, I love that. So, last few minutes here, I want to talk a little bit about, for anybody who hasn't implemented this, what do you think's coming as far, not just as far as CDC, but as far as data analytics? We've talked a little bit about
Hmm.
things that we're seeing in the real world right now. Obviously, it's
Yep.
it's a huge part of a lot of the apps that we use on a day to day basis, but also
Yep.
the analytics they're really starting to permeate into anything, right?
Yeah.
Even just like
Yeah.
down to building some MVPs, right? Like, one of the
Yeah.
things that we're trying to target in MVP development is, for example, um, so you want to get objective feedback, right, on your customers, but
Yeah.
if you don't know what parts of the application they're using, you can't understand which parts of the application provide value at early stages, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So
Yep.
just in your profession, you're in this industry and you're really close to it. What do you see the future of analytics? Like where do you see it going? How do you
Yeah.
see, how do you see the tech landscape of the future potentially changing or I guess, you know, adhering to these new kind of like analytics standards?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have to tell you, I've never been more excited about the possibility of what's coming up ahead, right? So for probably the better part of 50 years, everybody has been talking about data silos and breaking down data silos and all of that sort of stuff. And it turns out the data silos is still there, right? And the reason they're still there is because access to the data running through those things has been really difficult, right? You couldn't get the sorts of things that we've been talking about doing to actually work in the real world.
Hmm.
Analytics, if you and you know this probably better than most anybody out there. So to be effective at analytics, it really comes down to availability of source material as much as possible, right? You want to have as wide a view as possible because you never know when this sort of, this field over here might be valuable and that field over there might be valuable, and they could have some deterministic effect if you understand the relationship between them or whatnot, right? And so, with the presence of those silos, as I talked about earlier, right, it really hindered, right? People had to do a lot of bias, right? They had to think, okay, well, I can't really get this data, so let me come up with proxies and put some stuff in my analysis that I think is going to happen, right? And hopefully that's going to be good enough, right? So I guess my point is that we're moving into an era where we don't have to think about good enough, right? Where we now finally, I think, have the set of tools, and it's not just CDC. There's other ways that you can get data out of other applications, right? But the point here is that we're getting to a state right now where people have finally gotten their heads wrapped around the fact that data really should be available as a service to power your analytics, to power your machine learning, to power all these different ways that you can do things out of it, right? And so that when you ask about what's the future hold, in my mind, the future holds this ability where we can have fairly complete understanding of the environment around us, so that we can do new, cool, and very valuable things with it.
Yeah, I love that. You think there's ever going to be kind of a point where, for example, you'll be able to I don't know if you guys have this, I certainly haven't been able to do this yet, but um almost where you'd have the ability to go in and kind of build these models in a no code environment and be able to actually, translate that back, or you think we're still a ways off from anything like that?
No code modeling is probably still a ways away. Look,
Yeah.
we're kind of a no code platform. You put in your stuff and you click around enough, and things just flow. But modeling by their very nature, you could probably get some basic things going on that, but I think it's hard to escape the need for subject matter expertise in truly getting to a state where the model actually performs in the way that you need it to perform, right? Because it's
Yep.
at the end of the day, somebody has to make the decision that, oh, I'm going to act based on what this model says, and usually the best person to have that perspective or assurance is the person who's actually going to do the acting, right? And so
Yeah.
there's probably going to need to be somebody involved in it. Now, there's a lot of tools out there that makes model building, ever easier. Lots of libraries, lots of notebooks, and other things like that make it much faster and easier than even 2 years ago. So that makes it asymptotic to zero the amount of effort, but I don't know that it's ever going to get to zero, right?
Yeah, that was probably an unfair question to ask because as a software engineer,
Hmm.
I'm hesitant. Like I'm seeing a lot of people talk
Yeah,
about low code and no code, but the reality is that's kind of a poor marketing tool because realistically, somebody has
yeah,
to write the code. It's just not you,
yeah.
right? And so,
Exactly,
right.
exactly.
So, anyways, like where I'm getting at is like, cool, you might want to do an MVP that does some workflow stuff, but realistically
Yeah,
speaking, when you actually start talking about scaling up to the size of enterprise level applications, you're
yeah,
gonna need somebody who understands your business and what's going on in it,
yeah,
and who
yep,
understands the architecture, who can actually help, attach, CDC to your, whether it's
yeah,
Databricks or whether it's Snowflake,
yeah,
who can actually understand and build those models, right? Because
yeah,
realistically speaking, all low code or no code is just like this
yeah,
much larger bloated platform that's trying to like send a wide enough generic path down that most
yeah,
people can actually use it. So anyways, I was just
yeah,
curious what your thoughts on her because I have some strong opinions on low code and
yeah.
no code.
Well, I think, look, a couple things. I think your perspective is fair, but I think it pertains mostly to the consumption end of it, right?
Hmm.
I do think that there's a lot of stuff that works in the middle, and that's, by the way, a central theme of our company here. That like you don't need to have a human think a whole ton about, right? Like
Hmm.
humans shouldn't have to spend all day thinking about how do I get data from point A to point B. And there's probably a couple of other things in kind of the data delivery chain maybe you don't need humans working on, right? Humans should go off and spend their time doing things that are going to add the most value, which is the things that we're talking about here from the business perspective, is making sure that we have like cool and interesting ways to consume that data and to take action on it. I think that's a critically important piece of it as well.
Okay. So, quick wrap up.
Yep.
Sitting down, talking about just high level unlocking an org's data. What are like? Let's just kind of recap really quick here. So, actually hooking up something like Arcion, a CDC, to your production
Mhm.
databases so that you can start reading logs out, getting
Yep.
it into a some sort of third party system like whether it's Snowflake or Databricks or something else,
Yeah.
being able to actually start building those models, but also
Yeah.
being able to kind of like I guess format or shape the CDC so that it's sending the data that you need. Any other
Yeah.
recommendations to get started for an organization that wants to do this?
I mean, that's kind of the high level gist of what you want to start doing, right? I mean, so the only other thing that I would do is like being a guy who's been in this world where people have tried to like boil oceans, never wound up going well, right? What you want to
Right.
do is you want to start with a thing, right? Start
Yeah.
with a unit, a problem you're trying to solve. Don't try to solve all the problems, right? And don't wait for everything to be perfect either. The data is never going to be clean enough, right? There's never going to be enough time, right? So basically just get going, right? And use that MVP sort of perspective where you just start hacking away at it, seeing what works and what doesn't work, and you can come back and fix the things that don't work, right? That's
Yeah.
basically the process by which we tell everybody to do the stuff
Yeah.
that they need to do.
Yeah, I love that. Just it's a lot easier to get to the top using small steps as opposed to
Yeah,
giant leaps. So cool.
indeed, that's right.
Gary, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down
Yeah,
and talk data and analytics and all things CDC today. I appreciate it.
yeah,
Yeah, thanks for being here.
yeah. Super fun, Eddie. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Before we go, Carlos, what do we got coming up? I know we only got one more show this week because I'm on the road, but you want to just pop in and let everybody know?
Yeah, thank you, Eddie. So yeah, we only have one more show this week, and before you take off, and this is going to be on Thursday, and that'll be with Brian Cordero, the CEO of Greenclick Technologies, right here on Tech Backstage as ever. So remember, join us, folks, and be here or be square.
Thanks,
See you
Carlos.
then.
Thanks, Gary. Hope you all have a good afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks. You do the same. Take care now.
All right. Bye.
Goodbye.